the Russians have lost more than 4,000 main battle tanks. There are developed nations with only 150 or 200 or 300 tanks in their entire inventory. Russia's lost 4,000 tanks. Ukraine is now producing cruise missiles that are highly effective. It is producing a wide variety of things, and in so doing, Ukraine is really sketching out the future of warfare for the rest of us.
Hello and welcome to Independence Avenue Media. I'm Iyame Urmishuli, and it's my pleasure to introduce our guest today, General Christopher Cavoli. General Cavoli served as the 20th Supreme Allied Commander Europe, SACEUR, from July 2022 through July 2025. General Cavoli, thank you very much for joining us. It's a pleasure to host you today on Independence Avenue Media. Let's start to just dive into your assessment of how the war in Ukraine is going.
Well, I think Ukraine has pulled off one of the most remarkable military feats, of a century. Ukraine has managed, against odds, to fight Russia to a standstill in its invasion, and in fact is turning around and regaining moderate amounts of territory right now. I think the key to this was bringing together their organization and getting their defense industry up to a level where they don't depend entirely on outside support for their ability to defend any longer. Still a couple of things that they require outside support for, and President Zelensky has been quite clear about those, but the vast majority of what they're doing now, they are doing with their own defense industry. And so this is a huge change. The second thing that's changed is their ability to strike deep into Russia. And so they have clearly adopted, the Ukrainians have clearly adopted a strategy in which they will resist Russia longer than Russia can persist in the fight. How long that will be, we will only be able to tell when the events come. But Russia has been losing tremendous numbers of soldiers. A couple of months ago, for the first time since the beginning of the war, Russia has begun losing more soldiers in a month than they are able to field back onto the battlefield. And so this is a bad direction for Russia. Second, the deep strikes that Ukraine has been able to perpetuate against the Russian Federation have really started to take a toll on the energy industry inside Russia. But more importantly, it has intruded upon the consciousness of the Russian people, I believe. It has brought the war home to Russia. I found it to be remarkable that Russia asked for a ceasefire in order to be able to hold the annual Victory Day parade this year. And then when the parade did occur, it was greatly diminished in size. This was 100% because Ukraine has developed and demonstrated the ability to strike deep into Russia. So the tables have turned quite a bit. We see that in Crimea this week with the very significant strikes that Ukraine is doing into Crimea, and Ukraine has stabilized the situation and is rapidly moving into a position of gaining advantage.
Some of the experts told us in different interviews that this may be the beginning of the end of this war. Do you share that viewpoint?
Well, we hope we're seeing a beginning of the end of the war on terms that are acceptable to Ukraine. This has been an unbelievably destructive war. It's been very destructive for both sides. Ukraine has suffered a lot of human and material damage, and Russia has suffered well over 1.5 million casualties. So yes, we would hope to see this war end. However, I believe the strategy of both sides is to dig in for the long term and see who can outlast the pain of the other side. In this regard, I think the Ukrainians have begun to develop an advantage, but that doesn't mean we're coming close to the end of the war yet. We pray for that and we hope for that, but I think it's going to be a little bit longer still.
How do you think the war could end? Is it the diplomatic solution or is it the military solution? What's your view on that?
I mean, almost all wars end with some sort of agreement, right? This does not appear to be the sort of war that's going to move toward an unconditional surrender of one side or the other. The Ukrainians have demonstrated that they are not the type of nation that intends to surrender, and have also demonstrated that Russia is incapable militarily of pushing Ukraine so far that Ukraine has to surrender. Likewise, Ukraine doesn't have intentions to invade Russia, so it's not going to compel a surrender there. So we're not going to see a World War II type of ending to this war. That means anything short of that is going to be some sort of a brokered decision. I think the military instruments have to play out a little bit longer. There will be a little bit more war before the sides are ready to sit down and to be able to come to some sort of an agreement to end the fighting. But I certainly expect the fighting to end through some form of diplomacy in the end, whether third-party diplomacy or the two parties dealing with each other.
In one of the recent appearances, you said that it's unimaginable how big the scale of this war is.
Yeah.
Could you tell us about the scope of the war? What are we talking about here?
Yeah. Okay. So the Russians have been suffering 30 to 35,000 casualties a month. That's 1,000 people a day. That is more than an infantry battalion. That's almost 2 infantry battalions every single day since the beginning of this year. That alone gives an indication of the scale. But second, when we see the level of destruction of the cities along the front line in eastern Ukraine, just absolutely destroyed to the ground, that is an indicator of the scale of the fighting. It takes a lot of bombs to make things like that happen. And then finally, of course, we just see the material expenditures, the quantity of artillery shells fired by both sides, the numbers of tanks. The Russians have lost more than 4,000 main battle tanks. There are developed nations with only 150 or 200 or 300 tanks in their entire inventory. Russia's lost 4,000 tanks. So the scale of the conflict in terms of the amount of destruction is remarkable. It's also a big conflict geographically. I mean, the front line spreads for hundreds and hundreds and more than 1,000 kilometers. So the type of logistics necessary to wage a war like that really are remarkable as well. And it's interesting, it's relevant to us, those of us who are not involved in the fight. It's very relevant to us because most of us have been considering for the past 30, 35 years wars to be very smaller things, discrete, maybe shorter in time. And we've built our forces accordingly. And this is a wake-up call to build larger forces with greater stockpiles of munitions and reserves of material.
Where do you put Ukraine in terms of technological development? So we've talked about you talked about how the tables have turned, and potentially putting Ukraine in a stronger negotiating position. What got the Ukraine there? How did they accomplish it? And overall, how do you compare Ukrainian military with everything else that we know thus far?
Yeah, so as the Ukrainian stockpiles of artillery ammunition started to dwindle in 22 and 23, especially coming through the summer of 23, I think it became obvious to the Ukrainians that they need to substitute something else there. And the first-person view drones appeared on the battlefield. So this is not super high-tech stuff, right? This is not the same as an F-35 or something like that, but it was available. And it was something that could be innovated upon quickly. And so in just a remarkable spontaneous outburst, Ukrainian society began to set up shops that built small drones. And those eventually became the basis for further innovation. And we saw Ukrainian engineers go to the front lines and rapidly learn what countermeasures were being employed against their equipment and developing a countermeasure to that in this escalation of innovation that goes on. And so Ukraine was able to build from the bottom up a fairly effective but very low cost ecosystem of weapon systems that could be brought to bear against Russia. They aren't the most exquisite weapons in the world, but they're very capable. And what you need is not the very best of something. You need something that's better than what the enemy has that you're fighting. And Ukraine has done exactly that. And they did it from the bottom up. And it's been a lesson for the rest of us. Certainly the most experienced and most accomplished drone engineers in the world are in Ukraine right now. This has not stopped with the drones, though. Ukraine is now producing cruise missiles that are highly effective. It is producing a wide variety of things. And in so doing, Ukraine is really sketching out the future of warfare for the rest of us. And we would all be wise to study very closely what they're doing and to adopt significant parts of it.
How do you assess the threat from Russia? I've heard your public appearances, and the picture that you draw is both terrifying and requires a lot of attention. So where do you see Russian threat during this war as well as once this war ends?
Well, as usual with Russia, it's necessary to listen to the words of their leaders and to start from face value what they say. So during the war, I think NATO has very successfully contained the war to the battlefield where it's being fought. There has been some leakage out, some accidental leakage, but there hasn't been very much horizontal escalation, and there's been no significant vertical escalation, right? We've had threats about, nuclear veiled threats about going, but we haven't seen anything. And Russia's ability to really pick fights elsewhere is sort of limited right now. So I think during the war, we get a little bit of time to prepare. And we do need to prepare because Russia has stated very clearly that after this fight, they intend to reposition larger forces than before on the borders with NATO, and they will have the ability to reconstitute their force in not very much time. So it's important to remember that their Navy, other than the Black Sea Fleet, has not suffered greatly. Their nuclear forces have not suffered at all. Their Air Force has suffered minimally during this. So other than the ground forces, there is still a very significant arsenal that Russia possesses. Their ground forces are not that difficult to reconstitute. Russia has never depended on extremely high quality ground forces. It's depended on quantities of ground forces. And, to replace a conscript army that has an average of 1 year of experience takes 1 year. So we can expect Russia to rebuild as quickly as possible, to reposition on NATO's borders, and they will do so in a frame of mind in which they are very much persuaded that we are their enemy. And so we have to prepare for that. We want to avert problems with them. And the way to do that is by responsibly rearming ourselves and posturing our forces in such a fashion as to discourage and deter such a fight from ever happening.
Do you think NATO realizes the threat that you just described? And do you expect the NATO summit to address some of these threats?
Absolutely. I believe that the heads of state and government are very seized of this moment. The sea change in NATO since February of 2022 is absolutely remarkable. It began with the writing of defensive plans for the alliance again. For 35 years after the Cold War, we didn't think they were necessary. We didn't have them. Once the plans were written, one could describe what force is required to execute the plans. And so finally, we had a shopping list for defense expenditures in NATO. And now the time is to build that force and to pay for that force. But as we do so, we discover that we have some limits to our industrial capacity. And I think that's going to be a main theme of the Ankara summit. How do we move our defense industry? What are our objectives and what are our programs to move our defense industry quickly to fulfill the demands of our deterrence and defense plans?
And would you assess that Europeans are ready to ramp that up?
Well, it always depends on the company. You're on the country. Europe isn't one country. It's a number of different countries, and so each country has to make its own decisions. Some are making decisions very, very quickly. Poland has ramped its defense expenditures well past what we would have hoped for. The three Baltic countries have as well very significant defense expenditure increases in other countries. Germany, we're very, very proud of the work they're doing. Other countries are still struggling to find the money and to carve out the fiscal space in their budgets necessary to execute their responsibilities to rearm. But they're looking for that, and there will be political discussions in those countries. But I believe that ultimately we will see that NATO very responsibly and very quickly rearms itself and prepares to deter a significant threat from Russia after the Ukraine war.
General Cavoli, thank you so much for this.
My pleasure.
You just watched an interview with General Christopher Cavoli. If you like our interviews, do subscribe to our YouTube channel so you never miss an interview and great analysis that we have on this channel. Also, subscribe to our social media platforms, wherever you get your social media. You can just look us up by Independence Avenue Media. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.